All right. So, welcome our guest, Saman Shahi. Is that how you pronounce it correctly?
Sounds good enough. Yes.
Okay, great. So, I'll introduce myself. My name is Meagan Foster. I'm a second year music performance student at Western, and my main instrument is percussion. And Callista, you can go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Callista I am a second year music education major at Western University, and my main instrument is the tuba.
Cool. That's great.
All right. And then, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself, Saman?
Sure. My name is Saman Shahi. I'm a composer, pianist, conductor, and also an educator in Toronto. I work with the Canadian Opera Company as a teaching artist. I also conduct the Peterborough Concert Band as their music director. And I also just do a lot of freelancing. I also have been running the Iranian Canadian Composers of Toronto ICOT for the past 10 years as the executive director. I'm one of the co-founders. We're almost 10 years old. We'll be 10 years old in August. And aside from that, just freelancing activities and composing work and performing work.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We're super excited.
Awesome. Thank
All
you.
right.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we're just gonna go into the questions right away, I think.
Sure.
Um,
Sounds good.
so our first question we have for you is, how did you first begin composing?
Um, it's I, when I was younger, I was a late starter, so I only started playing piano when I was 15 or something. So I had no educate I had no sort of prior training. But before that, I always fantasized about film scores, right? So I would get the cassette tapes of my favorite film scores and pretend conduct with them and pretend play piano with them. So it was like my one of my pastime favorite pastime activities as a kid. And when I started playing piano, immediately I felt sort of gravitating towards writing, even if it was like short piano pieces and stuff. Um, and when I came to Canada, I actually decided to continue this musical journey into a professional life. I had a hunch that I always wanted composing to be my main source of income and activity and my professional life. But yeah, that would be it. Basically, film music just got me. got me. Even though ironically, I never went into that direction. Like when I actually, now 20 years later, um, I've written very little for film and animation, but that was what got me hooked.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
What type of music education did you receive while you were growing up?
Little to none. So basically, in Iran, schools have no music programs whatsoever. Um, so if parents were sort of affluent enough, they would enroll their kids in various extracurricular activities, music being one of them. Um, Thankfully, we were middle class, upper middle class, so we had no issues. It's just my parents always thought, oh, he's not gonna. His piano's hard. He's not gonna. So when I started to really get on their nerves around the age of 15, as I really want to do this. Um, that was the only one. I was very lucky that my teacher at the time he was a very serious musician. He caught me up really quickly, and I also made sure that I returned and I reciprocated by practicing and working really hard. But that was pretty much it. So when I came here, I did 2 years of high school here, and then I was totally baffled that music's actually part of the curriculum. Like you actually go into your music class, and so I immediately went into overdrive, and took as many courses as I legally could. I went into orchestra and I went into like the piano class and choir, everything I could get my hands on, because I was just trying to absorb as much as I possibly could. So that those 2 years when I did my grade 11, 12 here were just transformative, right? Because I was just doing so much. I was doing jazz band, I was doing choir, I was doing orchestra. I was just so much, and it was a sharp contrast to what I had experienced in back in Iran, right? But so I would say that was about it. And then I went into university, and it was a whole other can of worms there.
Oh, I had no idea that it's like, I guess we kind of take for granted that we get to do like musical activity. They're just like, we're allowed to do that here, and it's not, that's really interesting that it's totally not part of kind of the
Absolutely.
education system there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so important. It's so important.
Hmm. So then our next question, as you kind of discovered kind of the world of music opened up to you, what were some of your influences as a composer and also as a performer?
I always I had a great affinity for the great Russian composers. So Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich and Korsakov and Stravinsky. Those were always my big Shostakovich. Yeah, did I say Shostakovich? Shostakovich, of course. They were always my the big influencers, and I probably Korsakov's Scheherazade alone was one of the reasons that I wanted to write, because it just I was so enamored by it that I thought if I can ever write something that's 10% as beautiful as this, I'm good. I found that to be a big influence getting me in. Once I started university, I thought, okay, I need to do something that connects me back to, because there's all of these wonderful cultural and artistic aesthetics here, but I need a connector. I need a connector back to my home, because I need to stay grounded. I can't just go into the deep end and forget about where I came from. So I started actually playing the tar, which is the Iranian lute, and I actually learned the with a master here who teaches, and I actually learned the body of the Iranian music, which is called the radif. It's about 500 different musical fragments in like 12 different modes and stuff. And as I was learning those and learning also the technique of playing tar, that also started to seep into my musical quite a bit. So I started listening to a lot more of it. Obviously, I'd grown up listening to it on the radio and in the general daily lives. You would hear that kind of music, but then listening it with a more analytical ear, I feel like that also played a pretty big role on my musical literacy, and also just my inner ear when I use as a tool. And then so that was also a big one. And then I started analyzing more and more music of the 20th century composers. And I found that I'm absolutely fascinated with, for example, the spectralist composers, the French school. I found their music to be just so mysterious and so complex, but yet so attractive in terms of how what's on the page translates into what the sound is, because they were there to me. They seemed totally disconnected. It was such a mystery to me. So I found that to be a great source of inspiration as well. And once I graduated, and then I got myself out of the shackles of the academia, I started listening to a lot of alternative genres. So, progressive rock and alternative rock really got to me. So some of those bands that we all love secretly, that also started to slowly get into my music a little bit too. I wouldn't say too much, but maybe over the past few years, I've become brave enough to actually openly admit, I borrowed this from Radiohead. Or this chord progression is from the Grizzly Bear. But it started just around when I'd graduated too. So I would say all of these. I'm at the intersection of all these various influences, and here we are.
That's really awesome. Regarding the composers and other musicians who have been an influence to you, are you able to pinpoint what it is about their work that speaks most to you?
So that's a really good question, because I feel like there is a sense of universality to the works that I've always admired, and that's why when 10 years later you still listen to that piece of music, it still speaks to you, even though you've changed as a person. And that's what I was always after, in terms of the semantics of the music, not necessarily the technical aspects of it. For example, one of the pieces that I was just I've always been and still am obsessed with is Messiaen's Quartet for the End of Time, because every 5 years that goes by and I listen to it, it still speaks to me, but it's saying something different. So that to me has always been very, very interesting. Another thing that I always found really moving about a composer's work is this mix of innovation, but then also not innovation for the sake of innovation, but innovation for the sake of expression. And that's composers like people like, for example, Debussy's the first one, right? He's just writing these pieces that are very innovative for his time, but they're so expressive. Or Stravinsky's the same way, so that they can actually push the envelope and do something that's really outrageous, but then it's very impactful. And that's exactly the reason that a lot of the composers of the 20th and the 21st century don't appeal to me, because of that exact reason, that it's just merely innovation, not necessarily backing it up with any form of semantics, right? So it's just pushing the envelope for no reason. So that I would say that's that, and that's the balance that I always try to find in my work, to not just be a quote unquote composer with capital C, who's just doing all these sophisticated things, but just to have something to say, and to have something to say that will stay hopefully beyond my own life and will mean something to somebody when they listen to it.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you mean about innovation just for the sake of innovation. Because, yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that, especially in the contemporary kind of canon, for sure.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Um, so then, going off of that, today, what comprises your compositional process? Like, how do you begin to build your pieces from the ground up?
Mm-hmm. It really depends on the piece. It's honestly different every time. Sometimes I'll be sitting with like a piece of paper and actually like literally planning out, okay, how am I going to start this? Sometimes I'm sitting on my computer with my Logic Pro open and just messing around with sounds and then see what happens, and then I'll try to reverse engineer it into a notated system. And sometimes I'm just going straight into the piano and then trying things out. It really depends on the project, or what kind of language I'm using. If it's more of a like tonally centered language where I would need to hear things in a somewhat clear way, I usually use the piano, come up with some thematic things, and then go from there. I also really like, and this is something I've been doing for the past about 5 to 6 years, I've started doing, and that is to workshop my music with the performers a lot more than I used to. Of course, that's always not an option. If you're writing an orchestral piece, chances are you only get one chance, and that's when you're submitting the piece. But if you're writing, a song cycle or a solo piece or a quartet piece, it's really good to get the music unfinished to the performers, and they give you a bunch of feedback. And I would say that my most successful works have always been the works that the work was sent to the performer or performers, and it came back with a bunch of notes, and then I did my homework, and then I resent it, and it came back. So it's that process of collaborative partnership that's really important, and then also their voice becomes part of your voice, and you learn and you grow more. So I people always say, oh, writing music is a very lonely thing, and I couldn't disagree with that more. I feel like if you're doing it right, you should be constantly writing emails and sending videos and sending snapshots. Oh, does this work? Does this work? Can I hear this? So that I would say has become a pretty central part of my writing process. Whatever the pre-process is about, but when I'm writing it, I like to show it to my performers and get some feedback and make sure that it works for them and it works for their instruments, and then we're doing something meaningful there, not just me writing and then you performing and that's it.
That's very interesting. What would you recommend for someone who would like to learn more about Iranian music?
So Iranian music is very it's got an interesting history to it. Of course, because of the geography of Iran, there's a lot of various influences from the Arab countries all the way to Azerbaijan and Russia, and then we have India. There's all of that is present, and about 150 years ago, it was sort of all compiled into the Radif, which is the sort of the encyclopedia of all these modes and their melodies and the rhythms and all the and aside from that, there's also folk music. I would say the easiest way to get into that is to start listening to some of the great masters of Iranian music, people like Shajarian, who just died recently, people like Hossein Alizadeh or Kayhan Kalhor, and these people have also done things that are a little bit more Western ear friendly. Like they've done collaborations with, for example, Kalhor did collaborations with Yo-Yo Ma on the what's that project's name? The Silk Road project, for example, for years, or different chamber groups. So they are a good gateway to getting into what is known as Iranian music. And now, mind you, even Iranian musicians don't agree on what Iranian classical traditional music is, because everybody has their own definition of it. So somebody listening to this Zoom call right now might say, I'm absolutely wrong. So this is not it. There's something else. But I would say those three figures are probably really good ways to get into it. There's also a lot of really young musicians coming out of Iran that are doing really, really cool work. Whether it's fusion, like full-on fusion of Iranian music with something else, or just more innovative approaches to it that you can find on all social media platforms, and they're doing amazing things.
Awesome. Yeah, it's so hard to define kind of, especially like you said, when the country has had so many different influences on its history. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so then moving on to this, have you ever encountered any barriers in your career? And if so, how did you kind of overcome them and keep pushing forward?
Right. I'm really glad you're asking this, because I'm hoping that if a struggling young musician or artist or composer is listening to this, because about 80 to 90% of what you do is dealing with rejection, in just generally speaking, right? If you're really good at your job at hustling and networking, you're probably sending out a lot of things to a lot of people and a lot of organizations, and a lot of those things are going to come back as negative. And a lot of having a professional life is to know how to internalize that, and understand it, and if you need to do anything about it, fix it, or if you feel that it was just not the right fit, then moving on, right? I still do a lot of barriers, right? So there are these the dream projects that you have. Oh, I want so and so orchestra or so and so soloist to perform my music, or I want so and so to look at my music and to recognize me for who I am. And a lot of times things don't work out. Part of it, I feel like, is just the way the system works. So, a symphony orchestra has so many slots open for contemporary composers, so they need to fill it in, and they have a lot of considerations to make. And as somebody who also runs a nonprofit organization who produces music and produces shows, I understand that limitation. So I have that, because I have that side of I understand that side of the game. I try to rationalize it for myself, which is not the right fit. But what you have to really realize that you have to keep pushing, right? You have to keep trying, because the next breakthrough project, or the next project that's going to get you to that next breakthrough project, might be just around the corner, or might be a few months away, or might be a few projects away, and that every time you're getting rejected, you're hopefully learning something from that, especially the ones that really get to you, because you probably hear 5 no's a week. That's fine, but there might be a couple every few months that really make you question things. I also think it's important to face these barriers head on, and not to sugarcoat it, or to not to blame everything but you. Because sometimes sometimes the system is to blame. Sometimes the system is messed up. Sometimes the system doesn't want to program ethnic composers or female composers or trans composers, or sometimes the system is messed up. But chances are, living in Canada, hopefully, at this point, we've come to a point where, you know, it's better than what it was 50 years ago or 20 years ago. So also having an honest, reflective moment with yourself, and seeing why you're here and why you're doing what you're doing, and then keep pushing and growing as a result. But it's tough. Barriers are always there. No, rejection is always there, and you have to really develop a thick skin and grow as a result of it.
And through all these barriers, and really just throughout your entire music career, did you receive a lot of support from your family and your community?
I would say so. I mean, I'm really blessed with, like, the Iranian community here is. I mean, within ourselves, we're super hypercritical of each other because any ethnic community out, like, in diaspora is always just super self-critical, and that's just, I feel like, a product of being away from home and trying to be something else. Anyway, that's a whole can of worms I don't want to open, but we are very kind to our artists, so, somehow, which is great. So I feel like our community has always been extremely supportive, and they show their love and they show their support, and in whatever means possible, whether by attending or supporting financially or supporting in any other way possible. My family has always also been. I was the first full-time artist in my family ever, like, as far as we know. So it was a bit of an adjustment for them, coming from, you know, a country that doesn't see that as a means of living. But they've been extremely supportive, and every step of the way that I've been able to accomplish, they were just happier and more excited. Sort of coming around to the idea that a musician can have a professional life. It's just all about perspective and seeing where you want to go and having a plan, and just, as we said, not giving up. But yeah, I would say the support has always definitely been there.
That's great to hear that you've been so supported throughout your journey.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for young musicians who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color?
Wow, that's a big question. I would say, if I were totally honest, and I'm trying to phrase this very, very carefully, because whenever I put myself in the minority box, that minority box is a very dangerous thing, because then you are becoming this bait for being this token thing, you know. So if I just say I'm an Iranian composer, I don't even have that on my bio anymore, by the way. Like, if you look at my bio, it doesn't say Iranian composer, just because I want to be a composer. I always see these memes about, like, when they reverse the male and female, for example, they go, "Oh, this is a doctor, and this is the doctor, and this is a male doctor." It's amazing to see that sort of, like, cognitive dissonance. So for myself, what I've learned is that I try to say what I say through my art, but then not allow my identity to be boxed, and to be limited to, I'm a, whatever you want to call it, a composer of color. No, I'm a composer who happens to be a person of color, and I want to do all the other things, all the exciting things, and I want to be involved in it, but not because of that color of the skin, because I feel like that is just the wrong way to go about it. I want there to be enough acceptance of everybody, so everybody can partake in the artistic journey that we're all taking, and have their voices be present, but not to just, you know, do a check mark or have a quota filled. And unfortunately, that's something that we deal with. You know, the paradox is that you wouldn't get that gig if you weren't a person of color, but then because you're getting that gig because you're a person of color, now you have to act in such a way that a person of color would act, or you have to write the kind of music that person of color would write. So it's this self-perpetuating limitation that just like holds you down in that one place. So I would say, while it's important, the struggles that I've faced little to no struggle as a person. I've sometimes felt a little bit of prejudice here and there, but I've been lucky to not experience it. So I can't speak on behalf of a lot of other communities who've experienced much more profound pain and obstacles. But I would say getting out of that and sort of unshackling yourself from it, and being able to see yourself as a creator, and saying what you want to say freely, without those self-perpetuating limitations.
I really agree with what you were saying. That's so important. And like, just to add on to that, like, this isn't the same thing at all, but like, as a woman in percussion, which is typically male dominated, like, yeah, it's really important not to just limit, um, to in that box and feel like you're just there
Yeah,
for, yeah, like you said, to fill the quota.
yeah.
That's really
You don't
inspiring.
want to be you don't want to be a female composer. You want to be a guy.
Yeah.
Like, that's always, I always find that funny when people say, we have a female composer here. I'm like, why not just a composer? Just say composer. You don't have to say female composer, because then you're already putting like, okay, look how good she is as a female composer. No, we have amazing composers who happen to be women. It has this like, implicit condescension to it that just shouldn't be there. So,
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight. That's very interesting. And it's a side that I haven't really heard much of before, so that's really awesome. Um, the work that you've done with ICOT is
yeah.
very inspiring. Could you tell us a little bit about what's next for this organization and how we can support it?
So, absolutely. So ICOT is a group that we formed with four other composers, in 2011. Two of them have left by 2018. Two of them left, so it's just the three of us right now. Um, the goal was to create cultural bridges through art. So, whatever that means. That means producing new music, new shows, new concerts, opera, ballet. That means presenting. So we have had quite a few call for scores where we receive work from other composers around the world. And that also means partnering with other organizations. We've worked with the National Ballet of Canada. We've worked with the Scarborough Philharmonic Orchestra. We've worked with plenty of other the Tirgan Festival. That's the largest Iranian festival in the world outside of Iran. So that has been our motto. So just to create these connections. Since our two other members left, we are restructuring a little bit. We are trying to add on various organizational components, such as having a board of directors and all that. So far, we've acted as like an ad hoc group, just sort of getting everything undone ourselves. But if we feel that at this point, at about a decade in, it's time that we probably take some other steps. We have some projects in the oven that I can't mention yet because the funding for them have not been quite secured yet. But we have a few exciting projects coming up that I'm hoping that we are able to secure the money for. Um, and our goal is to not just serve the Iranian community, even though historically we have, but to also just be one of those organizations that everybody can trust and everybody can approach. We are a communal organization, right? We are there for the arts and for the people, and we want to connect the two. And we've been able to, through various projects. For example, we just had an opera put out 2 years ago called Notes of Hope about the story of a refugee, and what it means, and to see the world through their eyes. And we made that very sort of widespread in terms of what communities can come and watch this. So we made it available to all communities, and I think we've been successful in terms of reaching out to all people, and we've obviously plenty more work to do. Um, yeah, I would say that's pretty much the gist of it. Um, and to support it, just basically means connecting with us on social media, attending our programs. So far, we've only had a few engagements because of the COVID, only online engagements. But hopefully, once this nightmare is over, we can get back into the concert halls and get out and do some work. And we're hoping that more and more people hear about our work and attend our performances and programs.
Cool. That's really exciting that you've got projects on the go already, even though,
Yeah.
yeah, we're kind of stuck in COVID limbo
Yeah.
still. And
Yeah.
yeah. So next, I just want to talk about a couple of your compositions.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I listened to your song cycle, Songs of a Wandering Soul, and I
Yeah.
found it particularly compelling. I thought that it was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And the story that you're telling is really important. So how did you kind of conceive of this work? And then following that, one thing that struck me was the instrumentation. How did you kind of determine what ensemble to use?
So you wanted to know about just the general story of the Songs of Wandering Soul. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So like we talked about it, I was basically just searching for this this hybrid identity that I always think I have as an immigrant. So it's you're always in, as you said, limbo, right? You don't quite belong here, don't quite belong there. There's always this sense of identity war going on inside. Who am I? Who is this person that I'm calling myself, right? So this piece basically tries to just bring those together, right? So the life of a nomad, basically, the life of somebody who is calling multiple places home, and is somewhat estranged from both, right? It's somewhat doesn't quite feel grounded in either, basically. So there's a lot of influences, for example, there from, I took the words. There's very few words. The entire set of words used in this piece are basically just 3-4 lines, and they're taken from my diary, my public diary on my weblog from when I was like 15 years old or something. Because I thought, what else but the angst of a 16-year-old who just moved from Iran to here to tell the story of somebody who feels not belonged here, right? So I used that as a starting point, and I went from there. So basically, how a person who immigrates has an accent, and that accent, for the most part, stays with them. And I thought that was a really beautiful concept, that even though you integrate into a new society, out of every word that you utter, your initial identity is crying out. So you're even the way you speak reminds you, or reminds everyone of your journey and where you came from. And I thought that's a really profound thing that I'd not paid attention to before. So that's why I called it beautiful shackle. It's shackling you back to something that you initially were connected to, but it's beautiful because it tells your story. And also the middle movement is dedicated to a childhood friend that died of cancer when I was here. So it's got this, it deals with death. And then the third movement is The Mirrors Never Lie, which basically talks about, you look in the mirror and you kind of, when you look in the mirror in an honest way, you see things about yourself that could be either terrifying or really profound or transformative. So that's the piece I wrote, and I was really lucky to work with some amazing musicians who are all incredible improvisers and incredible creators themselves. They're almost all of them are composers and songwriters, and really, really good friends. So we got into the studio and we just played. The music is obviously written out, but there are parts of it that are left to chance and improvisation. There's little hints of Iranian folk music in there too, just as a symbolic thing, not as thematic material. And there's obviously a little bit of minimalism in there too, just because I'm obsessed with minimalism. Which is something that, ironic, I didn't even list as one of my influences, but minimalism was definitely one of my big influences. I've done a whole YouTube series about it. I just love it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But you're absolutely right. It's also one of my own favorite pieces of myself. So not to sound self-involved, but I like what came off of it. Yeah.
Wow, that is really beautiful and meaningful. Another one of your song cycles, Breathing in the Shadows, focuses on important themes of oppression and resistance. What was your process in choosing the text that you did for this piece?
So Maureen Bat, who is the who's the singer for that cycle, we did a few projects together, and then I thought, Maureen, maybe I should do a project where the poetry is just by women from countries that are women aren't able to fully be who they are, so they're oppressed. And then she thought it was a great idea, so we just went with it. And I found some incredible poetry from across the globe. So from Iran, I'd already written. That was the first thing we did together, by poetry with Farouk Farrokhzad, who was like one of the most important feminists of her time, in the, I want to say 1900, like early 1900s, up to the about mid 1950s. So we used one of her poetries. I found Carilda Oliver Labra from Cuba, who was just an incredible woman. And unfortunately, she passed away 2019, just before the full album was released, and it was so tragic. We found Yami Zhang from China, and also Dora Gabe from Bulgaria. So all these women, and also Titi Lopez Sanuga, who's a Nigerian Canadian Canadian poet. So these are the 5 people I picked out of probably 15 or 20 that I was just absolutely in love with. It was amazing, but we had to limit ourselves to about 5 or 6 songs. So that was the process, and it was not intended that all of them had this underlying sense of non-visibility in them. So every single poem had this, like, can you see me? Can you hear me? Can you really see what I'm going through? Can you hear my concerns? One of them is talking about death, for example. The other is talking about the abduction of the 200 some Nigerian girls in I think it was 2015 or 13. Can you see the struggle there? Can you see that? So it was very moving to me as somebody who's not a woman, to see that when 5 women who don't know each other from across the globe write poetry that's honest, there seems to be moments of intersection. Like they are saying the same thing sometimes in different ways and with different words, but they're saying the same things. It's one of my favorite things was to research for that project. It was great, and I had a great time writing for it, because I felt like it was just beautiful words that inspire such great music.
That's really interesting that yeah, like all across the globe and everyone comes together in that way. And then you also bring them together through
Yeah,
the setting that you did. That's awesome.
thank you.
So then you've mentioned that you're influenced by minimalism and you're a living composer today. How can academic institutions better incorporate contemporary music practices into their curriculums?
Um, that's a very good question. I feel like I, I do believe in the best of intentions. I do feel like every academic institution has, because there are people who are up in the top tiers that do want their students to get out and be successful and do work. I think the end result might not seem that way, and that's when we have to sort of, again, reverse engineer and see what didn't work. Um, Generally, I feel like creating early professional connections is a very important thing, right? So when for example, institutions bring in world-renowned performers, artists, composers, and allow their students to interact with them and hear their journey, and then hopefully interact with them in a professional way, in an artistic way. Maybe they will write for them, or they will have master classes. That's really important for these students to have a chance to see greatness and to be inspired by it. I think that's a really good way to go about it. One of the main things that's always missing in every single curriculum, and I'm hoping this is getting rectified soon, is the idea of how to conduct yourself financially and in a business, and just general baseline professional things that you have to know. How to approach a group, how to write a grant, how to do your taxes, how to account for your well-being under stress, how all of these things that are just missing from all the curriculums. Because I think when you get out, you'll eventually, if you're doing enough work, you'll eventually get some work. But then a lot of people don't know how to manage that work. A lot of people don't know how to correspond properly. A lot of people, like, these basic skills are, from my experience, is missing in a lot of folks. And I think being successful in a world of music as a freelancer, you have to have those skills, right? You have to know how to financially take care of yourself. You have to know how to raise funds for your projects. You have to know how to properly and professionally network with other people to be able to get your work out there. And I do see that some people suffer, they suffer with that aspect of things, even though they're fantastic musicians in all other regards. I think these two are pretty key when it comes to sending out musicians in the world that are able to take care of themselves and don't need constant support and don't need constant. So it's a very, very important thing, especially the second one, I feel like, the business side of things.
And going off of what you said, how can these academic institutions and the classical music world as a whole encourage more diversity and inclusion?
I think it's impossible for any curriculum to involve all the music that's out in the world. Like, it's just not logistically possible. And I always, when I see like articles on Facebook, people complaining about how many blah blah blah, I say, okay, well, for example, the U of T had taiko drums classes, and they had African drumming, and they just recently did like a few courses in Iranian percussion instruments. So they're trying their best. That's good. That's very, very good. And I think that's a good approach. So like a revolving program of maybe 20 or 30% of our courses should focus on things that are not just the canonic Western classical music. Or Western jazz, or whatever you want to call it. So I think that's a really important one. When I was in U of T, I heard zero things about indigenous music, and I think that was a travesty. So we live in this country. So if in Iran, when you go to the conservatory, you will have mandatory courses in Iranian classical music. Even if you're a flute player, like, you would have to know certain things about the music of your country. And when I went to university, not a peep. I don't know anything about the various practices of indigenous. So I think that should be part of the curriculum, and it should be taught in a respectful and comprehensive way. Of course, there are a variety of different peoples and different tribes, and probably won't be able to cover all of them, but there are so many traditions, and there's so many various variations of the same of different cultures and artistic cultures there. So that's one of the things that I thought were really lacking. Also, in terms of the guest artists that they bring, I feel like there could be more variety. I feel like there's always this tendency to just do the world music courses, and then all the guest artists that come in are just pianists and flute players, but if you normalize the fact that if you play bring a master kalimba player from wherever, and they're sitting there and talking to students who are just playing Beethoven and Chopin, if you normalize that sort of relationship, that they can still learn from something from this kalimba player, that I feel like is going to help, because a lot of my colleagues coming out of university always thought classical music is default, and I think that needs to break, right? The fact that we just see that classical is default and everything else as the other thing, and so that's an important one. I feel like breaking that the supremacy of the classical music. There needs to be it's all music. This one just happened to have a really wealthy patrons in the 18 and 1900s, so it just got performed over and over again, and then it became associated with class. So if you play classical music, you were of a higher class. Like, it's just a really complicated system, societal system, that brought it to be that classical music, but it's all music.
Yeah, that's very, very important to understand that, yeah, classical music is not the default.
Yeah,
I like that answer. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah.
All right, so the last few questions we have are kind of like big picture questions about your
Sure.
music and your career. Going on, what do you hope to achieve kind of generally with your music?
Uh, I, I, if you asked me 10 years ago where I would be, I honestly would not know. Like if you told me, oh, you'd be teaching opera with COC and you'd be conducting a wind band in Ontario, somewhere in Ontario, I would just tell you, like, you're crazy. It's, um, and but I would like to take my music to a more international stage. I've been lucky enough to have a few performances here and there in sort of in the U.S. and in Europe, but I'd like to obviously make that a little bit bigger. I'm becoming increasingly interested in opera. Of course, I'm also working with the COC. I've also written a few. So I'm looking into expanding on that interest and getting a little bit more involved in writing longer, more substantial operatic works. And I'm just my first love was orchestral music. I love it so much, and I feel like the inner kid in me still wants to write more orchestral music, and I've been lucky to have written quite a few. But my hope is that I will get more commissions and more performances around, at least around North America. So orchestrally, I hope that it would also go to a more prominent place. Yeah, but I would say these two are more my sort of end goals for the next 10 years.
Going even further, how would you like specifically young musicians to receive your work?
I and by young you mean like really young, or like you mean 20 something year olds? Yeah,
Anywhere in between, really.
because I work with like young kids, like kids of with the, for example, the COC, we're working with like 12-year-olds, right? So I'm writing for 12-year-olds, and I'm also working with them, and I'm also getting their ideas in. Um, and I feel like because I'm just generally a very silly and goofy person, they just take to me and they like me, and we have a good I have a good rapport with the younger kids. And the music that I write for them, they also just they like it because it's simple, but it's tuneful, and it's so there's that relationship. Um, I would love to write an opera for kids, like specifically for kids of like 15 and under, just because I feel like they have that sensibility that adults kind of lose in the growing up process. Um, so that's for them, and I still like to work with them in the future. Um, I I would love to be a figure like John Adams, who, even though he is 60 years old, still writing music like a rock star, and 20-year-olds listen to it and they're just amazed at it. He's my hero. I feel like I would like to be at that stage, not necessarily in terms of fame or recognition, but also just in terms of the output. That the output is so fresh that even in your 60s, you're able to adapt your language, and you're able to produce music that all across the spectrum of ages, everybody just finds exhilarating and just stimulating, so that's where I want to be when I'm 60 years old. Uh, being where, yeah.
Cool. All right. What do you enjoy most about your career and all the different things that you do?
Um, the fact that no 2 days are alike, like every single day is so different than the other. One day is all grant writing, one day is just getting to a deadline for a piece, one day is just practicing like manically because there's a recording session tomorrow, and then one day you have nothing to do, so you're having an existential crisis. So it's every day is so different, right? Every day is so different, and I really like that. I would hate to be a 9 to 5er. I don't think I was ever built for that sort of life. Um, Even though there are a lot of perks with that kind of occupation. I enjoy the fact that I have control over my day and I have control over my time, and I can take on as many projects or as little as I need to, and focus my attention on it. And I've been lucky that I've progressed in such a way that I'm now able to have further control on it, and take on only the projects that I really feel passionate about, or initiate projects that I really like to do. I would say that control over my own time and my own daily activities is definitely my favorite thing.
You've definitely had a very amazing and very inspiring career.
Thank you.
But if you could go back, is there anything that you would do differently?
I would probably, when I was in school, I would probably do more, spend a little bit more time on certain parts of my training, such as things like ear training, or just analysis of music. If I could just see my 20-year-old version of myself, I would probably, that's what I would say to myself. So just get into the music library and just like listen to 2 hours of music every night, go on the piano, analyze it, understand it, different things, very, very different things. That's what I would do. Just because as you get older and you get busier, there's just no time. And when there is time, there's just no energy anymore, right? I'm not a 22-year-old anymore. Like, I don't have that kind of energy to be able to work until 3 o'clock in the morning every night. I'm hoping that the 50-year-old me wouldn't tell me the same thing in 20 years. I'm really hoping that that's not going to be the case. Another thing is that I really wish that I played, even on a rudimentary level, at least a couple more instruments. So that would have really, really helped me as a composer. Even if I played a little bit of a brass instrument, a little bit of woodwind instrument, and those classes were available to me. I just didn't have the foresight to think, maybe, but like, when's that gonna be helpful to me? Well, playing a little bit of each of those instruments as a conductor and as a composer really, really goes a long way. So in that respect, I'm really happy that I played the tar as the instrument that I played in, because I still practice it from time to time, and I'm happy that so it kind of gives me this insight into string instruments and plucked instruments and stuff. So that's also, I would say, another thing that I would have changed, to diversify the instruments that I played just a little bit more, so to deepen my understanding of the music.
That's very interesting. I know here at Western we have the different instrument courses, and they are kind of designated as music ed courses, but I know myself as a performance major, I'm going to take a couple just to make sure I cover all the bases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you're a percussionist, so you kind of already play like 5 billion instruments, but that's the idea. That's the idea.
Mm-hmm. All right, so our final interview question. If the past or the younger you had a role model of the current you, how do you think that might have changed your journey as a musician?
Oh, that's such a good question. Wow. Who thought of this one? That's amazing.
That was me. That was me.
That was you. That's amazing. Good job. I think I would have calmed down a little bit more, because and I'm feeling the 50-year-old me looking down at me going, well, it's the same thing, right? You just need to, because there's always this anxiety that you're not doing enough, you're not enough, you're not famous enough, you're not you're not busy enough. There's always that nagging feeling that you have. That's on one side is a good thing, because it makes you a little nervous enough that you go actually do more work and do more networking and all that. But it also has its detriments, right? Just like mentally speaking, you're so drained all the time, and you're also just feeling like you're not, like, the worth of you is not enough, or like what you have done is not enough. And so I would say that's number one, and hopefully that I can look up to my version of me now and think, okay, so personal worth and professional accomplishments are not proportionate to each other. That's an important thing that you don't know when you're younger, and it's only after you've had some experiences that you realize, oh, okay, it's very different things. You can still be a very good person and not be famous, or vice versa. You can be a really piece of work and be a very famous person, and obviously vice versa. So that's another thing that I feel like I would have gotten from my from my version now that, personal growth is just as important as professional growth. And sometimes they're parallel, sometimes they're not, so and you need to pay attention to both of those things. But yeah, that's a very, very good question. I wish I had more time to think about it and get back to you, but yeah.
Callista, do you have any more questions that you want to add, or?
No more questions, but I want to say it's just been really excellent hearing from you, and I can't wait to share this with the rest of the faculty. I think they'll find it really inspiring.
Thank you both. And it was a pleasure talking to you and conversing about life. It's great.
So just to conclude, yeah, thank you so much for
Absolutely.
giving your time. It's been really
My pleasure.
wonderful.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.